Okay, so I don't really speak much about the government, but when it comes to the government, I think there are some main things that they should do. They should make sure that streets are tidy, that there's regular people that pick up junk. In fact, I think that should be done through people that commit crimes. Why send them to prison when you can make them clean the streets? I get that's a good idea because that saves a lot of money and it kind of punishes people by making them work certain things. But there's some certain things that I think the government need to be responsible for: schoolings, cleaning, bin services, and general, I guess, general rules as well. That is important. But this is how I see their roles are. When it comes to housing, though, I think I don't like the idea of people living off government funding, but I know that it's important that everyone gets a house. Having people living on the street. I've been to Hollywood. Hollywood was full of people on the streets, and that wasn't good either because these people who are living on the streets start going mad. They start becoming a problem. Are more likely to turn to crime or to violence or to robbery or you know people who don't have housing are miserable, and if people are miserable, they are going to cause problems for other people. So I completely understand that housing is an issue and something that the government should be responsible. But I totally agree that the government should set up housing arrangements that give people the apps. Say that if you want to get free housing, you can get that, but they have to make it the absolute bare minimum. Find out what, I don't know, the legal immigrants are paying. Technically, legal immigrants shouldn't be people who are living in a country if they don't have the proper visa to work. And therefore, if you're going to give free accommodation to people that is a similar standard to what legal immigrants would pay because they just don't want to be in their country, and they would rather have a shitty tiny studio flat in England because they don't want to live in the country that they were born in. I don't necessarily think getting rid of them is because they can benefit. They are going to be more hardworking. They're going to be willing to suffer to stay in the country because they are staying in the country illegally, and they're obviously doing that because they like the country or prefer the country more. So, but when it comes to people who want free housing, I know if you put too many of these people in the same property, they might become dangerous and a problem to each other, and especially if some of them start having kids, you can't really have dangerous people in very young. But I agree that there should be there should be free accommodation, free safe accommodation, clean and safe accommodation, free that is free for everyone. That should be available. But when I say free accommodation, that should be the absolute bare minimum. Find out what the hardworking people who just aren't, like say they're working in a shop. If they're working in a shop and they're not earning much money and they're living in a tiny studio flat, if you're going to give someone free housing, they should have less than that. Why? Because that person working in the shop is working in the shop and happy to work in the shop for long hours. And therefore, if someone wants to get free accommodation, you need to look at the sort of worst case scenario of what people are paying and saying, well, to make it fair, we're going to have to give you less than what they're getting because these people are working, they're working 20 hours a week or 30 hours a week in a shop. They're only just able to afford their studio flat. We are going to give you a free studio flat, but it's going to have to be slightly less than what they are because they are working and you are not working. I agree with this. I agree with this because I don't think it's fair that people should be rewarded for not working. People who are not working and are expecting government funding, they shouldn't be in this position. I think there is an exception, which is if you have a kid under 5. If you have a kid under 5, if you've gone through a bad divorce, if problems are happening, and if there is some real reason, then yes, okay, free accommodation. Every child under the age of 5 needs to be safe and should not be living on the streets, and they shouldn't be living in a house full of other people that are refusing to get a job. There's people who refuse to get jobs are often drug addicts or alcoholics and or lazy, or maybe they've got issues with people. I was on the dole for a long time, and occasionally you get people that were like, I showed up for work and I was 10 minutes late and the guy started shouting at me, and then I started shouting at him because I felt like he had no right to shout at me. It was just like, yeah, just a job. You should just be happy that you have a job. I don't know. I met some people that were a bit like that, and I get why you can't house, you know, kids in places like that, because the kids might end up getting abused. So I think if you've got young kids, um, maybe there should be some temporary. But I have this memory of when I was a child. You know, my parents, my dad, my mum's a hoarder. Place is a mess. I was always constantly tidying, constantly trying to make the house look like a house and not like a junk scrapyard. And it wasn't a nice environment. And my best friend, Biba, um, you know, her mum is a lovely person. She had issues when it comes to working because she had some sort of phobia of money and screwing things up, and I kind of get that. But I feel like she was a smart person. And I think if she was forced into a job, they were married together with someone, and she was living in a fairly nice flat, but then the relationship broke up, and then she moved into this small studio flat. And you know, it was a pretty big studio flat. And I was actually jealous of her even in that situation. Like, I had a two-bedroom flat. She was living in a studio flat, but it was a pretty large studio flat. Her mum was really nice. And I, you know, she was my best friend. So, or in the school, we weren't best friends, but outside the school, she's the one who looked like Mel Scary Spice. She's the one who kind of looked like Scary Spice. But, she, you know, she went through hard times with the divorce and suffering, and then when she was given, but then the government gave her a really nice two-bedroom flat, and I was so jealous. That flat was so much cleaner and tidier and nicer, and her mum was great, and she had her own bedroom. And you know, I was sharing my bedroom with my sister, and she got her own bedroom that even had a bunk bed in it. And then and they had a massive living room. It was all tidy, and I was just so jealous of that, you know, like, because my parents were rich. I had to live in a junky flat with parents I hated, and because she was her mum was single, and you know, she got to live in this house, and all paid for by the government. And I think she was a nice person, and I'm glad that she got to live in a nice place. But it feels unfair. You know, it feels unfair how she got to do that, and providing as she continues not working. And I think if she would have been forced by the government to work, you know, you can get this housing. Okay, it's going to be a bare minimum, but so is everyone else. You know, look to see what other people are living in, and don't just think I'm going to pick and choose who to help, but rather think you're going to have this because this is fair according to what other people who are working are, you know, they're paying this much, they're working, they're, you know, I actually agree with the idea of because there's another issue, which is that there are some like schoolings and teachers and stuff. A lot of teachers, I've heard things that people on low paid jobs it's hard to get people working on low paid jobs. Why? Because the housing market is so expensive that people don't want to work as cleaners or school people because they can't afford the rent, and therefore they're living far out of town. Because they're living far out of town, they have to pay like 30 or 20, 30 pounds to come into town. And if they're only going to be paid £30 a day, there's absolutely no point of that, because not only do they have to pay the rent from the outskirts of London, they also have to pay for the money to travel in, and it's too expensive. And because of this, there was not many low paid people happy to work at low paid salaries in London. You know, I get that's a problem. But if that's the case, then what you should do is you should have housing arrangements that says, you know, if you want to be a school teacher at this school, there's these properties are available, and you'll only get these properties providing you do the job. So it's like housing based on providing that you work. You know, I know the churches, that's how that is. There's a church near me, actually. I used to go to church when I was a kid. My mum would force me to go to church, and that there's a house that's amazing, palace basically. It's a palace compared to all the other houses, and it gets to be lived in by the preacher who ran the church. And you know, it's unfair that his house was so much nicer than everything else, and just for being a preacher. But it's that's how it should be. You know, you should have the accommodation, and you should have the job, the low paid job. We'll give you this much money, but we'll give you free accommodation. Okay, your salary is going to be incredibly low. Why? Because we're getting free accommodation. But how it is now, there's some people that are getting £20,000 a year and they get free accommodation, or they get a very cheap accommodation, and other people have to pay that same much, and they have to pay a huge, all their money gets, all their rent, all their money that they're making gets paid on accommodation. And I just feel like if that's the case, then you shouldn't be charging them tax according to them making so much money. If every penny that they're making is going on rent, then how can you charge tax on something that they don't have because they need to spend it on rent? And I don't know how the benefit system works. I guess for me to understand it, I'd have to talk to someone about what the benefit arrangements are, because I don't know. So I'm making that clear also. I don't know what the housing benefit arrangements are, but and maybe I'm going on about this because I haven't spoken about this in the past because I'm aware that I don't really know anything about it. I just know that it sounds incredibly unfair how some people pay next to nothing and other people, everyone should pay a similar amount. And if you can't afford it, then get out of London like I did. But yeah, I know that if that's the case, then there's not going to be anyone working at low paid jobs. So therefore, you should have some sort of housing scheme that says you can get this house providing you do this job. If you do this job, you're going to get a minimum, even less than minimum wage. Because there's plenty of people that are on minimum wage and still have to pay rent on top of that, and therefore there should be a minimum wage of what it is if you're not paying rent. And a minimum, there should be two types of minimum wage: a minimum wage that includes free housing, and a minimum wage that doesn't include free housing, but it's in line with what the cost of the market is, so that it's more fair. If the cost of the market is very high, and say if you are making 24,000 a year and the average one bedroom flat is 20,000 a year, then technically you're not making 24,000 a year, you're making 4,000 a year, and you should be charged tax according to the 4,000 a year. I know that's going to be incredibly less tax, but if you make it so that you're not giving away so much funding and so much money, then